Hi, I'm Kalis. At my grandfather's birthday party, he raised his glass and said, "So how's it feel stepping into the CEO role?" I froze. What CEO role? That was the moment I realized everyone knew something I didn't. My parents had cut me out. Of the company, of the truth, of my own future. And the worst part? They smiled through it all like nothing happened. But what came next? They didn't see coming. Before we dive in, what time are you watching this and where from? Let me know in the comments. I read every one. I arrived just as the sun began to slip behind the trees, casting soft amber over the backyard. String lights zigzagged overhead, dancing slightly with the breeze, and round tables were scattered across the lawn, each one draped in white linen and topped with flickering candles. Everyone was already seated, chatting with plates half filled. I adjusted the strap on my muted gray dress and smoothed the front of my jacket. I wasn't late, but I wasn't early either. Story of my life, really. As I stepped onto the stone path, Grandpa's eyes caught mine. He stood and raised his cane with exaggerated excitement. "There she is, my girl." His voice, warm and booming, cut through the music and chatter. Several heads turned. I smiled and waved, my heels clicking softly on the patio. He pulled me into a gentle hug, his grip surprisingly firm. "You look sharp, Kalis, like a leader." I smiled politely. "Happy birthday, Grandpa." Behind him, my parents were seated at the head table. Mom gave me a quick, closed-lip smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dad barely nodded before turning back to his conversation with Jonah, who looked like he'd stepped out of a GQ cover shoot, tailored navy suit, pocket square, the whole 9 yards. His arm was casually draped over the back of the chair, his Rolex catching the light. "Kalis," Jonah said, standing and kissing me on the cheek, "you made it. Glad you could squeeze us in." I ignored the jab. "Wouldn't miss Grandpa's 85th. I took my seat quietly at the far end of the table, across from the dessert trays. It was always like this, Jonah at the center, me on the edge. I tried not to let it get to me. I didn't need the spotlight. I'd spent years building companies no one in this family ever asked about. I showed up to every birthday, graduation, funeral. I was dependable, just invisible. As the courses came and went, stuffed mushrooms, brisket, sweet tea, I found myself retreating in my head, watching, listening. Jonah cracked jokes that made my dad slap the table. Mom bragged about his recent speaking engagement at some financial conference. No one asked me about my life in Austin or my work with seed stage founders. I was simply Kalis. No suffix, no title, just the reliable daughter who'd never rock the boat. Then Grandpa stood, forks clinked against plates as the chatter settled. He tapped his glass with the edge of his ring. "I'd like to say something before dessert," he began, eyes scanning the crowd. 85 years, and I've seen this family grow in ways I couldn't have imagined. There were chuckles. My mother dabbed at her eyes. "But there's one thing I've always cared about most, legacy, and now it's time to pass that legacy on." I glanced at Jonah. He straightened, clearly ready for the spotlight. I assumed Grandpa would name him executor of the estate or something ceremonial. But then he turned and smiled at me. "To Kalis," he said, raising his glass, "the future CEO of Bancroft Holdings." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. People clapped. My cousin whistled. Someone raised a glass of champagne toward me. But I just stared. CEO? My fingers went numb around the stem of my wine glass. My breath caught. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, swallowed, tried to speak. "What? What role?" I finally whispered, barely audible over the sudden hush. The applause died. All eyes turned to my parents. My father coughed, shifting in his seat. "We hadn't told her yet." The silence now was sharp, like glass shattering in slow motion. Grandpa blinked. "Told her? What do you mean? I sent the documents weeks ago." My mother pressed her lips together. Jonah looked down at his plate. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the next part. "We already named Jonah," Dad added, voice stiff. "We assumed Kalis wouldn't be interested. She's always been Busy. Busy? I nearly laughed. I'd spent over a decade advising startups, some of which had gone public, others acquired for tens of millions, and not once had they asked me to consider a role in the family business. Not once. Grandpa stared at them, then at me. What? I stood slowly. Excuse me. I walked away before the heat behind my eyes could spill into something visible. Inside the house, the noise dulled. The hallway felt cold, removed from the warmth and candles outside. I passed the family portraits, photos where I stood slightly out of frame, slightly out of focus. The study door was ajar. I stepped inside. It smelled like cedar and old leather. Grandpa's desk sat near the window, cluttered with books and open folders. And right in the center, a small ivory envelope. My name was written across the front in shaky cursive. For Kay. His handwriting. I would have known it anywhere. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the truth unraveling around me. I reached out and picked it up. The flap opened with a soft tear. Inside was a folded page. The first line was enough to still the breath in my chest. I didn't know then that this letter would become the spark to burn everything they'd built to the ground. I unfolded the letter slowly, the creases stiff and careful like Grandpa had folded it himself with purpose. My name was written again inside, bolder this time, underlined. My dearest Kalis, it began. I made it official. You're ready. You've always been ready. I filed it all. Board voted, sealed, and signed. Don't let them silence you no matter how loud they get. My fingers tightened around the paper. I read it again, slower this time, each word landing heavier than the last. Then I saw the attachment. Tucked behind the letter was a scanned copy of the board resolution. It had the company's letterhead, my full name listed right there next to the title Chief Executive Officer, dated exactly 2 months ago, signed by Grandpa and by Caroline Brister, our corporate legal counsel. My breath caught in my throat. I'd seen this signature on dozens of filings in my advisory roles. It was real. I leaned back against the edge of the desk, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. Why hadn't anyone told me? How was something this massive buried so easily? And by whom? The house was quiet except for the muffled sound of clinking glasses and distant laughter drifting in through the French doors. My eyes kept moving back to the date. 2 months ago. That would have been April. And April was when everything had started to feel off. I stepped away from the desk and began pacing the room. My heels sank slightly into the plush rug with each turn. That whole month Jonah had started acting like he was already in charge. He'd begun showing up to family dinners in pressed suits instead of his usual hoodies. He started using phrases like, "We've decided," and "executive direction," as if he'd swallowed a corporate playbook. I remember thinking it was odd, but I chalked it up to him playing grown-up again. He'd done it before. Jonah always had phases, but this time it stuck. And then suddenly, the memory hit. That weekend in March, when I was told to sit out the family logistics summit, my mother called it tedious. Just operations talk, she said. Nothing strategic. I remember laughing and agreeing, deciding instead to spend the weekend volunteering at the youth center's charity drive. I spent hours packing up donation bins, loading them into trucks. Felt good about it. Meanwhile, Jonah was at a lake house just outside Atlanta. I only knew because he posted pictures of himself in a sleek boardroom overlooking the water, captioned, "Legacy Talks with the Bancroft Visionaries." No one had invited me. That must have been when the transfer happened. When the family sat down, passed around folders, nodded to each other while quietly cutting me out. I paused by the bookshelves and let my forehead rest against the cool glass of a framed photo, Grandpa and I standing in front of the old storefront when I was 12. He had just let me sign my name on a new ledger for the first time. He'd said, "One day this will all make sense to you." Well, it didn't make sense now, not one bit. I folded the papers carefully and slipped them into the inside pocket of my blazer. As I made my way back through the hallway toward the backyard, I slowed when I neared the patio door. Through the sheer curtains, I could see Jonah standing with our father, their heads close together. My mother stood a few feet away, arms crossed, lips drawn into that same unreadable line I'd known since I was a child. She looked up and caught my gaze. She didn't smile. Neither did I. I pushed open the door but didn't return to the table. Instead, I walked past them all, calm and measured, like I hadn't just been handed evidence of betrayal from every person who claimed to care. I stepped into the kitchen, where the catering staff was quietly cleaning up near the service island. The smell of peach cobbler lingered in the air, and glassware clinked gently as someone rinsed dishes. And there she was, Dana, my cousin, slender, soft-spoken, always 2 steps behind at family gatherings but sharp when it counted. She was wiping down wine glasses with a towel that looked too small for the job. Her hands moved quickly, but her eyes darted toward the dining room like she was trying to listen in on something. I approached slowly. "Dana," I said quietly, keeping my tone even. She flinched slightly before turning toward me. "Oh, hey, Kalis, you want something to drink?" "No," I replied, "just a quick question." She paused mid-polish. "Were you at the Lakeshore board meeting back in April?" The towel in her hands went still. She didn't answer, not right away. Her eyes flicked to the hallway behind me, then back again, uncertain. That silence told me more than I wanted to hear. I stepped closer. "I saw the photos, Dana. I know it happened. I know Jonah was there. And I know that's when something changed. I just didn't know until now what, exactly." Her hands lowered slowly. The glass she held wobbled on the counter. She didn't meet my eyes as she finally whispered, "Kalis, you weren't supposed to find out." Dana's words lingered like smoke in my ears, thick and hard to breathe through. I just stood there in the kitchen, the hum of the fridge and distant clink of glasses from the dining room fading into nothing. My grip tightened around the edge of the sink, the cool metal biting into my palms as if to anchor me. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Dana's hands trembled as she kept wiping the same wine glass over and over, the cloth twisting like a nervous tell. I finally spoke, my voice low but steady. "What do you mean I wasn't supposed to find out?" Dana glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. "There was a seat, Kalis, at the boardroom in April. Your name was on it. I saw it printed on the itinerary, taped right onto the chair. But, before it started, your father came in, took the tag off, told the organizer, she's not part of the future. And they just removed it." The sink behind me felt miles away. My knees bent just slightly as if the weight of her words pressed down on my spine. I stared at the countertop, the faint speckles in the granite blurring. "He said that?" I asked. Even though I already knew, I could hear it in my head. The tone, the finality, the same voice that used to read me bedtime stories, now slicing me out of the picture like I was a mistake no one wanted to admit. Dana nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. Sorry." That word had lost its shape a long time ago in this family. It sounded like an excuse, like a door someone keeps promising to hold open but never does. I wanted to ask her why no one stood up for me. Why even she, someone I'd helped get that admin job at the company, chose silence over truth. Instead, a memory pushed forward, uninvited and sharp, 2 years earlier. Thanksgiving. I had just flown back from a 3-week project launch in Berlin. I was jet-lagged and sore, and still had that airport smell clinging to my clothes. But I'd come straight to the family house because Mom insisted, "We want the whole family together this year." When I got there, everyone was already in matching outfits, burgundy sweaters and navy pants for the men, beige dresses for the women. I hadn't been told. I wore a simple black turtleneck and jeans. Mom looked me up and down and said, "Oh, well, you can just take the photos, sweetheart. You're the best with a camera." And like a fool, I did. I took every smiling picture, every group shot, every angle they requested, but not one frame had me in it. Not during dinner either. The table was full. Even the kids had place cards. Mine was nowhere. I sat in the kitchen, eating from a paper plate on the counter, while everyone else laughed over the sweet potato casserole. At the end of the night, Jonah stood up for the family toast. To the people who carry the legacy forward, he said, clinking glasses while my father beamed at him. No one mentioned me. Not once. Later, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry in front of them, never had. But that night, in the dark silence of the driveway, I let it happen. Quiet tears, no sobs, just water running from a place that had been drying out for years. I came back to the present when Dana whispered, I should have said something sooner. I thought maybe if things changed, they'd bring you back in. I shook my head. I never left. They locked the door. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Without another word, I turned and walked out. The party had moved to the backyard now, laughing, music. Someone had even brought out sparklers. My parents stood by the fire pit, deep in conversation with Jonah. He looked tense. Good. I didn't join them. I slipped out quietly, past the hallway, out the front door, down the stone steps, and into the cool night air. My car was parked at the end of the driveway, hidden under the shadow of the old oak tree. I slid in, turned the engine, and didn't look back. By the time I pulled into my small apartment complex, the streets were empty. I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, and was greeted by silence. No curated smiles, no polite betrayal. Just my space, my rules. Inside the closet, on the top shelf, sat an old plastic storage bin labeled in faded marker. Dad's stuff. I pulled it down, the weight heavier than I remembered. Inside were the fragments of a childhood I kept tucked away. Drawings I made in second grade, a broken charm bracelet from the county fair, a yellowed envelope with a stamp half peeled, and there, buried beneath a stack of brittle papers, was the company's founding charter. 3 names, Grandpa's at the top, my father's, and Jonah's, scrawled with the kind of confidence only inherited, not earned, not mine, not even a placeholder. I sat on the floor, the documents spread around me like bones from an autopsy, picking through the past, realizing no one had ever expected me to be part of the future. I closed the bin slowly, resting my hand on the lid. Maybe I was never supposed to belong, I said aloud. And then I saw it. Tucked behind a photo frame, barely visible under the corner of the bin. It was thin, folded, and marked with my grandfather's handwriting. I stayed still for a long moment, the shadows of my apartment stretching longer across the floor as the city outside quieted. The whisper of her words still rang in my ears. Dana's voice, thin as thread, saying what I wasn't supposed to know, and yet, I did. Finally. The air in the room felt heavier now, like even it had decided to sit with the truth. I moved toward the bookshelf out of instinct, trailing my fingers over the spines of old family albums and binders of contracts no one had cared to keep updated. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed to touch something that still felt mine. That's when I noticed it. A photo frame. Crooked, forgotten, tucked behind the collection of vineyard brochures. The photo inside was of my grandfather standing in the old bottling room, sleeves rolled up, pride in his eyes. I reached for it to straighten it, and as I lifted the frame, something shifted. A faint sound, like dry paper brushing wood. I turned it over. The backboard wasn't flush. The corner had lifted just enough to wedge something behind it. My heart stuttered. I eased it out carefully. An envelope. No name. Just yellowed edges and the faint smell of tobacco and old cedar. Inside, a letter. Not typed. Handwritten. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, and as my eyes fell on the first sentence, I knew. It was his. My grandfather's handwriting. I'd seen it scrawled on the early business ledgers, on the side of wine barrels, even on my birthday cards when I was little. It was him. The letter wasn't finished. No date. No signature. Just raw honesty caught mid-breath. Kalis, I should have said this years ago. You held us together when we were falling apart. Without your strategy notes, the FDA phase would have sunk the whole company. I saw it. I knew it. And I let your father talk me into pretending it didn't matter. I told myself he'd come around, that you'd get your due. I was wrong. I blinked hard, the page blurring for a moment. Then another line. You had the mind, the vision. I just didn't have the fight left in me to face him. No flourishes, no long explanations, just truth. The kind I had begged for with every silent dinner, every missed phone call, every seat not pulled out at family functions. And here it was, sitting behind a photo no one bothered to hang straight. I folded the letter back with shaking hands, pressed it to my chest, and leaned into the arm of the couch. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I'd spent so many years wondering if I'd imagined the exclusion, told myself maybe I hadn't tried hard enough, hadn't spoken loudly enough. Maybe it was me. But that letter? It was the first time anyone from my family ever said in writing that I mattered. Not as a helper, not as an assistant, as a mind, as someone who built something real. A gust of memory blew through me then, uninvited but persistent. Late summer. The fundraiser at the Vineyard. I'd flown back from Denver that morning, still jet-lagged but smiling. I wore a muted green dress and heels that pinched my toes. They'd asked me to speak, then changed the program last minute. I needed air. I remember walking toward the east courtyard, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. I turned the corner and stopped. My father's voice, sharp, quiet, not meant for anyone else to hear. She doesn't have the grit, Jonah. I needed a man to carry this forward. She's too soft. She'll fade out. She always does. Then Jonah's laugh, low and cruel. Then let her fade. I remember the way my hand had clenched around the wine glass. The stem cracked beneath my fingers, slicing a small line across my palm. I didn't flinch, didn't step into view. I just backed away. Slowly, quietly, like a ghost returning to the edges. They never knew I'd heard. Back in the present, I walked into the kitchen and lit a small candle. The flame flickered, catching the gold edges of the letter on the counter. I leaned against the counter, staring into the glass of the window where my reflection stared back. I didn't look broken tonight. I just looked clear. Maybe I did fade. But not because I was soft, not because I lacked grit. I faded because I believed for too long that they would change. That if I just waited, if I just stayed kind, stayed loyal, they would see me. They didn't. Not once. But maybe I didn't need them to anymore. I walked back to my desk and sat down, the laptop humming to life. I opened my email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second, then began to type. Subject, board meeting. Request to speak body. I'd like to speak at the next board meeting. I stared at it, one sentence. That's all. Then, just as I reached for the trackpad to hit send, a small notification popped up in the corner of the screen. New message, from an address I hadn't seen in years. I blinked, froze, then clicked. What I saw made the candle beside me flicker, as if the room itself had just gasped. Just as my finger hovered over the mouse, about to click send, the screen blinked. A notification popped up in the corner, subtle, almost easy to miss if I hadn't been staring into space. I need to tell you something. I think they stole what was yours. Olivia. I froze. Olivia? I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. She used to be Grandpa's assistant. Quiet, gentle, always 2 steps behind him, but never unprepared. If she was reaching out now, something was off, deeply off. I sat back in my chair. The glow from the laptop spilled across the desk, casting long shadows on the wall. Outside, the hum of streetlights and distant traffic filled the silence. Inside, only my pulse thudded. I typed back, "Where and when?" She responded almost instantly. "The Redwood Diner, back booth, 9 p.m., come alone." I glanced at the clock. It was already 8:12. The Redwood Diner was only 15 minutes away, but I still needed time to pull myself together. I changed into jeans and a long coat, something simple. My face looked tired in the mirror, not from lack of sleep, but from years of pretending silence meant peace. As I locked the door behind me, I paused. I wasn't doing this out of curiosity. I was doing this because something inside me, something long buried, had finally sat up. The drive to the diner was short and unmemorable, but the second I stepped out into the gravel parking lot, I spotted her, Olivia, already seated in the booth, nursing a cup of tea. She looked older than I remembered. Her hair, once honey blonde and tight in a bun, now hung loose and streaked with gray. When I slid into the booth across from her, she offered a faint smile but didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, she reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a large manila folder. She slid it across the table like it was radioactive. "He asked me to keep this," she said. "It was supposed to be presented at the next board session, but it never made it." I stared at the folder, heart thudding. I could see the old family company letterhead through the thin paper. Grandpa's stationery. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were several pages, neatly typed. The top one bore the header, "Succession Planning Document, Confidential." My name was there. My name. Kalis Rowan, Successor CEO Candidate, 12-month Transition Plan. Signed, August 3rd. Notarized, 1 week before his stroke. "I was told," Olivia whispered, eyes downcast, "he changed his mind. That he wanted Jonah." I blinked. "But he didn't." She shook her head. "No, he didn't." Silence settled between us, heavy and tense. I scanned the details, his signature, the seal, the outlined responsibilities. It was real. Undeniably real. The signature wasn't a copy. It was ink. "They buried this," I murmured. She nodded. Then, reaching into her purse again, Olivia pulled out something smaller, an old scuffed digital recorder. "I don't know how long I'll have access," she said, voice tight, "but I kept this because I couldn't live with what I heard." She hit play. My father's voice came through, distant but unmistakable. "She'll fold the second we challenge her. Just say she wasn't ready. Use the clause about board confirmation. Keep it quiet until we've cemented Jonah in." Another voice answered, "Gregor," a name I hadn't heard in years but remembered well, always sitting with folded hands and an unreadable stare during board meetings. "That's risky," he said. "We'll handle it," my father replied. "She's emotional, not strategic." There it was again, that word, as if feeling was some kind of disease, as if caring deeply meant I was incapable. The recording ended. I stared at the blank screen of the recorder, then at the folder still lying open in front of me. My hands were still. No trembling, no tears. "They buried me," I whispered, more to myself than her, "and hoped I'd stay underground." Olivia didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her eyes met mine, and she saw it. The quiet shift, the invisible pivot. I wasn't going to scream, or beg, or plead for what should have been mine. I closed the folder, slowly, neatly, and placed it back into its envelope. Then I looked at her and asked, "Do you still have access to the board?" She hesitated, then nodded. I took a slow breath and exhaled. "Good," I said. "Let's make them regret underestimating me." We didn't speak after that. I just left the booth, folder tucked tightly under my arm. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I walked like someone who finally knew which door had been closed and where the key had been hiding all along. Back at home, I didn't turn on the lights. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the city lights blinking outside the window. Then I pulled out a notebook and began mapping it all out. Names, dates, clauses, leverage points. Not rage, not revenge, a strategy. Because this time, I wasn't going to fade. That night, I didn't sleep. I mapped out every step of what I was about to do. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, just the low hum of the fridge and the occasional rattle of the wind against the window. I sat there at the kitchen counter, my laptop open, phone face down, and a steaming cup of green tea gone cold hours ago. I stared at the burner email I had just set up. No signature, no name, just a sentence and an attachment. I hovered over the send button, then clicked it. It was done. The message was short. "You already know this is real. You heard the tape. The world might too." I'd sent it to Gregor, one of the more seasoned board members. He'd been in that room with my father, talking about keeping me out. I remembered his voice, low, uneasy. If there was one person with the spine to say, "This isn't right," it might be him. Or maybe I was just clinging to hope. After that, I waited and waited. 2 hours passed, then 3. I refreshed my inbox. Nothing. Refreshed again. Still nothing. My hands started trembling, not out of fear, but that peculiar mix of frustration and déjà vu. The same silence I'd heard when I was 18, after I applied for an internship at my father's firm and never got a reply. The same silence when Grandpa first had his stroke, and I asked to speak at the hospital meeting, only to be told family members only. I stood and paced the room. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from Sasha, my friend at the front desk of the family business. Her text was only a few words, but they hit me in the gut like a punch. They're gathering for a confirmation vote tonight. Quiet, no press. Confirmation vote? For Jonah? They didn't even flinch. No pause, no investigation. They were moving faster, to shut the door completely. I slipped on my coat, stepped out onto the balcony, and let the air hit me. The sky was heavy, clouded, like it knew something was coming too. In the haze of the night, my mind pulled me back, unexpectedly, to a memory I hadn't touched in years. I was 10. Grandpa had taken me down into his wine cellar, far below the house, where the air was always cooler and the wood beams held decades of dust. I remembered running my fingers along the labels, trying to read the fancy script. He knelt beside me, handed me a dusty bottle, and said softly, "Some grapes bloom late. The best ones do. You'll surprise them one day." I smiled then, feeling proud. But now, the memory burned. I was tired of being a late bloomer, tired of waiting for anyone to notice. Back inside, I made myself some toast. Not because I was hungry, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I was halfway through spreading butter when the phone rang again. Olivia. "Kaylis," she said, her voice tight. "I heard something. Your dad's meeting with the estate lawyer next week." I swallowed. "What for?" "They're dissolving the trust." My body stiffened. "Wait. What?" "If they dissolve it, your legal leverage disappears. You won't even have a seat at the table anymore. It's how your grandfather protected you. But that protection's about to be erased." "When?" "Monday. First thing." I looked at the calendar. That was just 7 days away. 7 days to stop decades of manipulation. I sat down again, hard. The edge of the wooden stool dug into the backs of my thighs. My apartment, though small, had always felt safe. But tonight, it felt like a box. No windows, no exits. I stared at the blank wall across from me, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I almost gave up. I whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I wasn't born for this fight. Maybe I'm just emotional, not strategic. Maybe I should walk away." But my voice sounded strange in the room, like it didn't belong to me. My eyes drifted across the counter. Amid the bills and folded notes, something peeked out from inside my notebook. A triangle of paper, folded neatly. Familiar. I pulled it out. It was a napkin, soft, linen, off-white, folded into a tiny triangle, just like Grandpa used to do after every toast. He used to call it his silent signature. I unfolded it. One line, written in his unmistakable scrawl. "The best revenge is building better, G." I read it once, then again. I stared at those words like they were fire, and I was the match. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, though they weren't wet. There were no tears left, only a burning clarity. I whispered into the quiet, "They'll never see me coming," and I meant it. The next morning, I put on my grandfather's watch, the one they didn't know I kept. The leather was cracked and stiff, but it still ticked, still moved, just like me. I left the house early. No breakfast, no makeup, no calls, just my bag, a manila folder, and the number Grandpa scribbled once on the inside of an old cigar box. Arthur Radley. By 9 a.m., I was parked across the street from a weather-worn legal firm that barely had a nameplate. The building looked like time had forgotten it. But that's exactly what I needed. I sat still, watched a few pigeons hop across the curb, then stepped out of the car. Inside, the place smelled like old leather and dust. No receptionist, just shelves full of paper and silence. A slow creak from the back room, and then he appeared. Arthur. A little stooped, with a hearing aid and reading glasses, but his eyes, sharp as broken glass. "You're his," he said. Not asked, stated. "He always said you'd come one day." I handed him the folder. Inside was the original succession document, handwritten, notarized, and signed by Grandpa 3 months before his stroke. Arthur unfolded it with care, then took a magnifier from his vest pocket. "This is his signature," he said, tapping the ink with one knobby finger. "And that date, yes, I was counsel that month. If they try to dissolve the trust with this active, I'll bury them in injunctions so deep they'll beg for daylight." I didn't smile, not fully, just nodded. That's all I needed. Before I left, he reached into a drawer and slid a small photo toward me. Faded edges, sun-bleached, but unmistakable. Grandpa and me at the vineyard. He was pointing to the ground. I was crouched down with my palms in the soil. "You were the only one who asked him about the dirt," Arthur said. "Everyone else talked grapes, or wine, or labels. You asked about the ground." I swallowed. That old ache came back, deep behind my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. "He always said good roots matter." Arthur gave a single nod. "He chose you long before you knew it." I walked out quietly. Didn't say goodbye. The sun had shifted across the street, lighting up the courthouse across the block. The day had begun moving faster. By the time I reached the tower where the boardroom sat, I could feel the pressure in the air, thick and expectant, like a storm before it breaks. I made a quick stop on the 9th floor where Sasha worked reception. She looked up, then mouthed, "They're in there, already started, no press." I gave her a small nod. "Thanks, you might want to step out for 10 minutes. She blinked. "Is this that moment?" I didn't answer. Just walked past her. The boardroom door was shut, voices muffled behind the thick glass. I paused for one full breath, then opened it. Jonah was standing at the head of the table, both hands raised in some grand performance. "I humbly accept the board's faith in me." He stopped mid-sentence. A few heads turned. Then all of them did. I stepped in, calm. No announcements, no drama, just the steady sound of my heels on the polished floor. I set my bag down, pulled out a small flash drive, and placed it on the table. "Before you proceed," I said, "I believe this deserves a listen." Jonah's face twitched. Gregor went pale. The room was silent as the chair, Mr. Graves, leaned forward and inserted the drive into the boardroom laptop. Grandpa's voice filled the room, clear, warm, unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. I appoint Kalis Monroe as CEO of the Monroe Foundation and all its holdings, effective immediately upon my passing. Let this serve as legal witness. This video was recorded in the presence of counsel, signed and time-stamped." He even smiled at the camera. "I don't pick leaders by bloodlines. I pick them by grit, and no one has more of that than Kalis." The recording ended. Silence. Jonah's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked at Mr. Graves, then at Gregor, who was suddenly inspecting his fingernails like they might hold the answer. Mr. Graves cleared his throat. "Why wasn't this shared with the board earlier?" I didn't blink. "Because some of you already heard it, and chose silence." My gaze rested on Gregor. He lowered his head, saying nothing. Jonah tried to speak again, voice wavering. "This doesn't override the updated document. It's not the one we—" I cut in, evenly. "No, it's the one he meant. The one you tried to erase." Graves held up a hand. "Enough. We clearly have a conflict." I stayed composed. "This isn't revenge. This is correction. I won't let legacy be decided by cowardice." For the first time, no one interrupted me. Graves looked at the rest of the board, then leaned back in his chair. "We have 2 claims, 2 signed documents, and exactly 24 hours before the trust closes. If this isn't resolved by then—" "It will be," I said, voice steady. "I'll see you all in court." No one said a word, not even Jonah. As I turned to leave, I caught the reflection of Grandpa's watch in the glass door, still ticking, still moving, just like me. The courtroom was colder than I expected, but my voice, finally, was not. As I stepped inside, the polished wooden benches and the seal above the judge's bench looked just as I remembered from my childhood, back when Grandpa would bring me to observe small probate cases to learn how the world works. It was poetic now, standing here not as a girl learning, but as a woman defending everything I had left. Reporters lined the back. Whispers passed like wind through wheat, rustling through the room with names like mine, Jonah's and Monroe Estate, dropped in every breath. Jonah sat smug in a tailored navy suit, flanked by two attorneys who looked far too pleased with themselves. My parents were behind him. My mother avoided eye contact. My father kept checking his watch, as if that would speed up whatever outcome he wanted. The judge called the hearing to order. Jonah's lawyer stood first, polished and rehearsed. We submit to the court a document signed 2 weeks prior to Mr. Monroe's passing. He began smoothly, holding up a printed memo in which Mr. Monroe expressed intent to revise the succession plan and name Jonah Monroe as acting trustee and CEO. He passed a copy to the clerk and handed one to the judge. The courtroom leaned forward. My hands stayed still in my lap. My breath stayed steady. I'd seen that memo. I already knew what was coming. Jonah tilted his head ever so slightly in my direction, wearing the look of someone who thought he'd won a game he didn't even finish playing. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at me. "Miss Monroe, you have the floor." I rose without a sound, walked to the table, set a small black remote on the surface. "I'd like to present a recording," I said clearly, not rushing. "One that took place in my grandfather's study. The footage was captured using a security system legally installed on his property." Jonah's team shifted. My father suddenly sat upright. I pressed play. The screen flickered, then sharpened. My grandfather's study appeared, warm lighting, shelves of thick books, and the familiar scratch of his voice speaking off camera. Then the conversation began. "Just sign this," my mother's voice said. Calm, too calm. "It's better for the company. Kalis won't even know." Grandpa's reply came sharp and furious. "You want me to betray my word? She's the only one who ever listened. If you bring this up again, I'll cut you all out entirely. I have my lawyer on speed dial. Try me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Jonah's attorney lunged to his feet. "That footage is invasive. It should be inadmissible." The judge cut him off. "It was recorded on private property, by the owner. Overruled." Jonah stood stammering. "This doesn't prove anything. He was under medication. His mind was fading." "He wasn't fading," I said, turning to face him. "You just didn't like what he saw clearly." Silence followed. The kind that doesn't come from lack of words, but from too much truth hanging in the air. I walked back to my table. From my coat pocket, I pulled out the old folded napkin, the one Grandpa had slid across a diner table when I was 17, back when I thought he'd forgotten my birthday. He hadn't. He'd written just one word: CEO. I laid the napkin next to the certified copy of his will. The ink was faded, but the name he wrote was mine. I turned to the judge again. They didn't ignore me because I wasn't good enough. They ignored me because I made them uncomfortable, because I didn't ask for permission to be competent. The judge looked at the memo again, then to Jonah, then to me. After review of the evidence, video and written documentation, and considering prior legal designations by the deceased, the court rules that all board privileges granted to Jonah Alden Monroe are revoked effective immediately. The rightful trustee and CEO of Monroe Holdings is Kalis Monroe. Applause burst from the back of the courtroom. Reporters scrambled for photos. The gavel struck the bench twice, but even that couldn't settle the electricity in the room. Jonah tried to shout something but was cut off as 2 court officers escorted him out. My mother dropped into her chair as if her spine had finally given up. I stood still, letting it all happen around me. No fist pump, no smirk, just clarity. Outside, the sun had dipped low behind the courthouse, casting long shadows across the steps. Reporters swarmed like bees, flashing lights and microphones aimed straight at me. One voice rose above the others. "Kalis, do you have anything to say to your family?" I stopped at the base of the courthouse steps, looked directly into the nearest camera. "I didn't fight them to win," I said. "I fought them to stop lying. For anyone who's ever been told they're not enough, make them say it in court." And then I turned. The car door opened for me. As I slid inside, I didn't look back. The vineyard was quiet, sunset burning gold across the hills, as I returned to the place where it all began. I parked near the gravel path, cut the engine, and sat for a long moment with my hands still on the steering wheel. The air smelled of summer dust and late harvest grapes, and there was a stillness I hadn't known in a long time. No headlines, no courtrooms, no raised voices or lawyers in tailored suits. Just the land, the soil that had held our family's history long before the lies began. I slipped off my shoes and stepped barefoot onto the path. The earth was warm beneath my feet, the way it had been when Grandpa and I used to walk this exact route. He in his wide-brimmed hat, me trailing behind with pockets full of questions. He always answered them all, except one. Why he never said much around my parents. Now I understood. Silence wasn't weakness. It was knowing when the truth didn't need an audience, just time. The vines were still here, though newer hands now tended them. I could have sold the property, wiped it from memory, but I didn't. I arranged for it to be cared for, left alone from development. Not for profit, not for legacy, just peace. As I reached the old house, its shutters freshly painted but still slightly crooked, I paused at the steps. Inside, everything was as I remembered, except the weight in my chest was gone. There were no ghosts left to chase, only echoes. Weeks had passed since the court ruling. Jonah disappeared from the public eye almost overnight. A quiet news story surfaced days later, federal agents probing financial misconduct that predated Grandpa's death. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even finish reading the article. My mother? Word got back that she'd moved in with a distant cousin in Arizona. She called no one. My father never apologized, but I received a manila envelope in the mail with an old photo inside. It was us, sitting by the lake. I was 8. He'd scribbled nothing, not even his name. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things don't resolve, they simply go quiet. Inside the wine cellar, it was cooler than I expected. I flicked on the small light overhead and descended slowly, running my hand along the railing. Dust danced in the beam, floating like memories suspended in time. And then I saw it. The photo frame on the shelf, glass clean, intentionally placed, held the red napkin. The same one Grandpa had used years ago to write my name beside the words, CEO in training. It had faded now, but the ink still whispered his voice. Below it, a small drawer I'd never noticed before was slightly ajar. My heart beat slower as I opened it. A single envelope, my name on the front, in his handwriting, no stamp, no postmark. Inside was a letter, creases worn from age and softness of paper touched many times but never sent. I sat down on the cool stone bench and unfolded it. Kaylis, if you're reading this, you've found what I couldn't say out loud. I never meant for you to carry the weight of proving anything to anyone, not even to me. You don't owe them understanding, but you owe yourself the truth and the space to bloom. This vineyard will give you that, if you let it. Don't live my legacy, live yours. I always knew you'd find your voice. I just prayed the world would finally listen. Grandpa. The tears came slowly, not out of grief, but release. I didn't sob. I just let them fall, quiet and honest, like the letter. I sat there for what could have been an hour, then carefully returned the letter to the envelope and placed it beside the napkin. They belonged together. When I left the cellar, the sun had almost dipped below the hills. I walked out onto the patio and watched the last streaks of gold give way to lavender skies. In that stillness, I thought about scars. Justice isn't revenge, it's the chance to live without fear. I didn't get the family I deserved, but I got the clarity I needed. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Later that month, I signed the final papers establishing a nonprofit for underrepresented founders, especially women like me who were dismissed before they could speak. The first grant I signed off on went to a young woman in Oakland, rejected by her family for wanting to pursue engineering instead of joining their real estate dynasty. In the memo line of the check, I wrote, "For the girl who deserved to be chosen." She sent back a photo holding the check, smiling with the kind of wonder I hadn't seen in myself in decades. Back at the vineyard, before heading home, I walked once more past the vines. Not every wound heals the way we want. Some stay quiet, but when truth finds the light, it doesn't need to shout, it just stands. Have you ever had to walk away from your own family to protect your peace? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.